Hello everyone, welcome to another series in our ongoing More series webinars. My name is Chris Corbett. Joe Papano couldn't be with us today, so I will be our fill-in moderator. You may remember me from such previous webinars as the mobile device management in a post-BlackBerry world and the first iOS 5 webinar we did. Today I have with me our product manager focused on all things iOS, Mr. Josh Lambert. Hey Josh.
Thanks Chris. Hello all.
So you guys remember Josh from the previous version of our iOS webinars. So what we're going to talk about today is a recap of some of the series we've been doing on iOS 5. The first one we did was an introduction back on October 13th. Hopefully you all got a chance to listen to that. The second one we did was on some of the new policy controls. So Josh went through some really interesting stuff on iCloud and Siri control and things of that nature. And today Josh is going to talk a bit about some of the new app management functionality offered as part of iOS 5. So some really interesting stuff coming in today's presentation, particularly based on the conversations we're having with all of you and your peers about the need for applications and really true application management in 2012 and beyond. And of course, if you all attended all three webinars, obviously including today, you are automatically entered into our drawing to win a brand new iPhone 4S, which we will be doing here in the upcoming days. So obviously check your email. The first thing I wanted to do was ask a quick question of the audience, and want to understand, are you or do you have plans to develop your own internal iOS apps? So choose one and let us know if you already developed these apps, if you plan to develop these apps, if you're currently evaluating whether or not you want to, or if you do not currently have any plans to develop apps. Okay, so it looks like we've got a pretty healthy mix here of respondents coming in terms of plans for app development going forward, and a bunch with no answers. So obviously it is a hot topic, and it's something that folks will be quite interested in going forward. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Josh and kick off kind of what we're going to talk about today in terms of iOS 5 application management.
Okay, sounds good. And have we shared the results there yet? All right, awesome. Okay, just want to make sure. So, yeah, it looks like the most number there was people who've already developed them, followed by a close second to kind of the rest there. So it's pretty interesting that the majority there is people who've actually already developed them versus the rest. But as far as what we're going to talk about today is a quick recap on iOS 5, just so we all have a good baseline on sort of what's new. I'm sure it'll be a review for most of you, especially if you attended our previous webinars, so we won't spend too much time there. Then we'll hop on to the meat of the presentation here with iOS 5 app management capabilities. We'll go through sort of the current state of the iOS 4 app distribution, and then we'll kind of go through on what's different and new in iOS 5. So some of you who maybe haven't quite had too much experience with app management, becoming a good primer for what you can do in your iOS 4 devices and then what you can do in your iOS 5 devices. We'll then follow it up with what it means for IT and your users, and followed by a quick preview of the iOS 5 app management user experience and sort of what your users can expect to see as you start taking advantage of these features. We'll then go to a quick live demo of managing apps with iOS 5, and can walk you through some of the screens and management processes that you might find when managing this as an IT admin, followed by a quick review of iOS 5, and then a wrap-up for our call today. And then we'll go to questions, of course, at the end. All right, so our quick review of iOS 5. It was released October 12th, and is the next major version of iOS for the following devices: iPhone 3GS and above, the iPod Touch 3rd Gen and above, and all the iPads. So previously, you can see there that the iPhone 3G is no longer supported, so that device will be staying at iOS 4 for the future. Of course, some of the iPod Touches that are also around the same time period also aren't upgradable, but the rest of the other devices are. And so pretty healthy mix there, and a lot of these devices that are fairly old can still be upgraded, which is quite nice for a lot of your users who already have devices. getting a quick question here about VPP. We will discuss VPP briefly as well, and we'll get there in just a second for those questions that are coming in there. But hopping on down to the rest of the iOS 5 features, we do have 200 plus new features in iOS 5. These include things like iCloud, iMessage, Notification Center, Newsstand, as well as Siri for the iPhone 4Ss. It's not available on the other devices just yet, but you can imagine once it exits beta, it'll be deployed out to more devices and as they kind of new devices ship, as well as, of course, the new policy options and app management features. The policy options we went through in the previous webinar on iOS 5 2 weeks ago, but the quick sum there is we have some new controls for things like Wi-Fi proxies, iCloud controls, as well as some control over Siri, which is everyone's favorite feature of iOS 5, it seems like. Finally, one of the last and probably biggest new features for iOS 5 is really no longer requires iTunes. So previously you had to have a USB cable to kind of really do anything, activate it, upgrade it, back it up, kind of management-wise, and now that can all be done over the air with iCloud, which is pretty great, and it really allows you to use these devices in more places than before.
A lot of great features there, Josh. Just curious, based on your internet research on all things iOS, have you seen any adoption rates so far in terms of the upgrade to iOS 5?
Yeah, so certainly there's some stories around recently. I think I saw one from a day or two ago, a couple of ones, but somewhere between 30 and 40% of the folks have already upgraded to iOS 5.
Oh, wow.
So it's a pretty good uptake rate. It's only been out for, I guess, right around a month, and we've already seen a pretty large percentage of the population already upgrading. So that's pretty good news for everyone who wants to take advantage of these new features.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the app management features while we're all here. So we'll go through a quick review of iOS 4. If you haven't kind of been familiar with this before and tried to do app distribution on iOS 4, it's very much a pull-driven distribution system, and really it's driven by a user clicking on a link. And a lot of us in the app management community have been able to kind of get pretty creative with this and have some pretty nice user experience workflows, but ultimately it still drives down to having a user click on something, essentially on a link, and then having that process start from there. You get some options there around pushing it by SMS, email, or like an app catalog that from a vendor like us to kind of get that going, but not much further options there as far as control. And then once the user did click on that link, there were different processes for both iTunes and enterprise apps. So iTunes apps, if it was an App Store purchase without VPP involved, we would direct them to the iTunes page to download the application in question. So essentially, the iTunes App Store would launch, and they would be taking them to that application. If you did have VPP or a redemption code, they'd be taken to the redemption code page as well. For enterprise apps, it actually had a bit more of a different user experience where the user would get a small dialog box to prompt and pop up and ask them if they wanted to install the enterprise application. They would then click OK, and they would install on their device. So in that sense, it was a bit smoother on the enterprise side than the iTunes side, but definitely was a bit, there was some room for improvement there, let's say, for iOS 5 to come through. Finally, after the applications were installed on the device, there really wasn't much further control that was available. And so you kind of got them down there, and unless you kind of wrote specific functions into your application on the enterprise side, there wasn't much further control you could do. So with that said, that's sort of the current state of things with iOS 4, and really sets the stage for what's new in iOS 5. So one of the biggest new features is the push distribution of apps. What this means is that we can actually go out there and actually cause the device to start the app install. This is possible for enterprise apps, free applications, as well as paid apps with VPP support. So one thing you can't do is you can't push an app that is actually paid but don't have a redemption code. So if you wanted to do it that route, you would still have to do the standard iTunes App Store redirect there. But for the rest of them, we have that on-demand push. Finally, once the user does get that push instruction, they are prompted to accept the installation. I'll give some screenshots here shortly, which we can show you to kind of get an idea of what that will look like on the user's device. Once the app is installed, the app is then managed by MDM. So some of the things that we can do once the app is quote-unquote managed, we can prevent the app from being backed up. This could be things like preventing it from being synced to iTunes as well as the associated app data. And that's actually pretty powerful because, as you can imagine, with 18% of you here developing your own internal applications, there's probably some pretty sensitive data that goes along with these applications. and you probably don't want them to really leave the so-called device potentially. And so in this case, we can actually prevent that from being backed up to a user's home computer, for example. Furthermore, we can also, of course, delete the application if NDM control ends. I'm not sure how familiar all you are here with kind of the NDM model for iOS here, but the user can actually, in most cases, opt out of management, sort of an opt-in and opt-out system. And so now we can actually have the applications that were pushed or managed from NDM also be deleted when the user sort of ends control. It's also possible to, of course, also end control from our side of things. And so if the user, for some reason, leaves the company, we can have that relationship end, and those applications would be cleanly removed from the system along with any associated data. So these are two really nice controls that really sort of extend the control of the device out to applications and their associated data, especially as more and more of you here develop enterprise applications. Finally here, we have the NDM application can also delete an application at any point in time. And this actually does not require any sort of user click-through here. Unlike the install, there is no prompt to accept. So if, for example, the user is no longer in the marketing group and you get a marketing app pushed to them and they say move to, say, sales, that application can be automatically deleted as they change groups or distribution groups. Or, for example, if you wanted to just simply delete application potentially for any reason, that's of course also possible.
So that's an interesting thing to think about. So with all these organizations starting to deploy more enterprise apps or even utilize marketplace apps for enterprise purchases, there's probably a lot more corporate data residing inside the application itself. So it seems like Apple's kind of ahead of the game there. Josh, would you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Great.
Once the app is then pushed through MDM, the application is then always managed. So if you had a user who was, say, installing, say Keynote with the VPP code, and then for some reason decided they wanted to delete the application and then reinstall it from the iTunes store, that application, even though it was removed and then installed from a different source, would still be considered managed, and those policy controls and those MDM actions would still be allowed to take place. So in that sense, there really isn't any way of getting away from the management control once the user has installed it from the catalog there.
So I think that brings us to our next poll question, and it has to do with Apple's volume purchase program. So I'm curious, of those that are joining the conference here, how many of you are actually already leveraging Apple's volume purchase program inside your organization? We'll give a couple minutes here, a couple seconds to get answers, and then we'll go ahead and share those results.
All right, so it looks like the overwhelming result here is no, which is interesting. I think we had a question before of what countries are eligible for VPP, and right now it's actually just the United States for the actual headquarters of the company, as well as one more detail is actually for users' iTunes accounts also have to be in the United States as well. So both those have to be true to be able to take advantage of the VPP program there, and that could be in some ways contributing to the survey response here for any of our international friends or perhaps global companies. We have users in all parts of the globe, but it's certainly interesting to see the breakdown there for the volume purchase program. And we actually have a little more information on the VPP program for those of you who might not be aware of it later on in our webinar here.
Yep.
So a little bit there on the VPP integration. With iOS 5, it was possible to do this in iOS 4, just a quick set of baseline there, but iOS 5 really takes it a step further and makes it a much smoother experience. So previously with iOS 4, it wasn't always possible to know 100% sure who needs the VPP codes and who doesn't. So you can imagine if a user has an iPad, an iPod Touch, and an iPhone, you might not know which of these devices need a VPP code. With iOS 5, actually, it's much more smoother, and the device actually knows itself whether it needs to use the VPP code or not. And so it's a lot better user experience for the users, and a lot better reliability there from the admin side of things. Certainly some great improvements there for the VPP program, and we're excited to look forward to more of you taking advantage of that program there in the future. All right. So moving on to the user experience here. Again, there's two major ways to get devices, applications down to your devices. There is the instant push, and that is sort of our term for the on-demand push of applications to a user. So they could be checking their email, they could be looking at Facebook, and they'll get a little box popping up on their device, kind of asking them to install. The other option is sort of the iOS 4 method, where they'll actually go to the app catalog, and then they will see a list of applications where they can potentially install. We'll still use the iOS 5 application install method, so we can still take control of the policies with that method, but it provides a nice context for users rather than having a box pop up on their screen. So as far as what the user will see for the instant push application, here's a screenshot from my iPhone I took, and so you can kind of see that blue box that will pop up. And that'll pop up regardless of where you are in your workflow there. So I could be checking email, I could be making a phone call, and that little blue box will pop up asking me to install, in this case, Angry Birds Free. So you can kind of see here that you might want some context around this potentially for applications that might not be as critical to deploy. And so we do have our app catalog, which you can see in the icon in the background there for the app catalog experience. And so if I were to click on that little icon in the background corner, I would then see my personalized app catalog. These are only applications that were pushed to me that are available for me as a user of the company here. I have 3 applications pushed. I have WebEx, AnyConnect, as well as, in this case, Angry Birds Free, for example. If I can then click on the application in question, get a little more information about it. In this case, it is an iTunes a market application here. We did automatically pull in the screenshot and the description and the icons there for you, which you can see in the description here, and then offer the option to install it with that simple free button in the upper right-hand corner. If you then click that button, what you'll see then is that same blue screen popping up, but this time it's really much more in context, you know what's going on, and it's a little more of a flow of the user experience there. So we do have the option of doing both, and we think it's a good option as far as allowing admins to kind of decide whether or not they want to let users pull it or have the system push it out to their users. I think we had a quick question on the VPP status there as far as if it's allowed for education as well as business. It is allowed for both business and educational companies at this point in time.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk a little bit about how you can take advantage of that program later, and certainly we can follow up with additional details.
Yep. All right, so moving on to some of the improved support here and kind of rolling up all of these policy options and actions and kind of what it really means to your users. So one of the major functions is that it really offers an improved bring your own device support. I'm not sure how many of you are taking advantage of this in your companies, but certainly the overall market has a pretty high penetration rate of companies who are considering letting users bring their own devices. And so what this means is that you're going to have devices and data which could potentially be personal as well as company owned. And so you really can't just kind of take that wipe action anymore without potentially irritating some of your users who've lost photos, lost their own personal email, and potentially some other things there. So one important action is the selective wipe action. And with iOS 5, that action can now include applications. So previously it was limited to things like email accounts, Wi-Fi accounts, and VPN accounts. And the applications, once they were pushed, were still sort of left on that device. And now, with iOS 5, we can now pull those applications off as well as our data. And so that's a really powerful new control we have to support the personally owned devices in the enterprise and making sure your apps are still secure for those enterprise applications you're developing. The other option there is also, since it really is a personally owned device, and Apple is a pretty strong believer in the opt-in and opt-out method, which we'll go into a little more detail later. If they do opt out of MDM, previously, while they could do this, their applications would stay. And now the applications will automatically get removed as soon as they opt out of MDM. And so that's another really great security control there to make sure the applications aren't on any devices where they shouldn't be and can't be seen and controlled. And last, the instant push there really lets you get your users the applications that they need. So, for example, one I saw you earlier around Cisco AnyConnect, that's just a VPN application. And we can actually push settings to that from our MAS console, but you actually do need the application to be there before you can actually make a VPN connection. So it's really important for that VPN to work that the app is installed. And so the users might not understand that, for example, they have to go to the application catalog, click on AnyConnect, and then install it before that starts to work. In this case, you can now use that instant push to get those applications out there that users really need to do things like simple VPN connections. And so it's a really nice way to kind of make sure users have the apps that they need to do, that they need to have rather, to get their work done. Moving on down to your IT and control and security teams, of course, they all also like the new improved controls here. The main thing there is being able to lock your apps and app data to a device. You don't have to worry about anything kind of more along the lines of iTunes and where that backup data will go, and if they can copy that to another device potentially, or any of those questions really aren't really too relevant anymore, as you can always just block the user from backing up that application data, as well as the application itself as well. So it really lets you kind of retain that control of your applications, whereas before, once they were installed, there really wasn't many options there to kind of take further control of the applications. If the user left the department, if it was the company, those applications just kind of still stay there, as mentioned before. So in short, your IT teams and your security teams should like this, and probably will, and your users will also hopefully be happy as well, as your IT teams will be more comfortable allowing your users to bring their own personal devices, which seems to be a pretty good morale for users, as well as getting them the applications that they need to actually do their jobs here, like AnyConnect, VPN clients, and potentially some other applications as well. Finally there, on the VPP program, it is actually quite easy to get started. I've included a link there below for the business program. There's a separate link for educational for the folks on the call who are from the educational institution. As mentioned earlier, it is actually open to only U.S. companies and U.S. users at this point in time. But apart from that, it actually is quite easy to get going. So essentially, you need some basic information about your company, and then you can then go ahead, create an account. It gets approved and actually quite fast. As far as the approval for the company, and then you can then start buying essentially multiple copies of a single application, like say Keynote here, for example, maybe 1,000 licenses to manage out to your users. And one of the main drivers there is really to help your users have a better user experience, so you don't have to kind of worry about purchasing applications, worrying about if it's allowed to be expensed or not, whether the company approves it or not. As well as, of course, your expense team will hopefully enjoy not having to go through and process a whole bunch of 99-cent expense reports. I'm not sure how expensive or how much money it costs to process an expense report in your company, but there's a good chance it probably is more than 99 cents after all total is done. So hopefully it's a win-win for everyone involved, your expense team, your users, as well as, of course, IT control there as well for VPP applications. All right. So, move on to our live demo here, and we'll kind of log in real quick to our portal and kind of give you a quick idea of how to kind of manage this from the admin screens. Hopefully we got a good example there for the user side of user point of view, and now we can again show you the admin point of view here. Let me just get a little bit keyed up here for our environment and get logged in and share out my browser. Looks like I timed out here real quick, so just give me a second. All right, so hopefully you can all see my browser here. I can go ahead and log into my account I created here. We can go ahead and start showing you some of the admin controls that you might see as far as if you were an IT admin, for example. All right, so hopefully I got my password correct. Looks like I did. So now we're logging into our portal here. We've got a number of controls here, along with my installation checklist, which I've completed already. So we got one device connected in, just as a quick example here as a test account. But we'll move over to the app catalog section. And you can see the 3 applications that I had set up earlier in those screenshots. Angry Birds, Cisco AnyConnect, as well as WebEx here. It's really easy to go ahead and add a new application to be managed here. I'll go and pick on iTunes one, just going to get started here. We'll go look for Keynote, and so we're doing a live search of the iTunes market, or iTunes App Store. Here's Keynote, great, it's $9. Go ahead and add it, and then at this point in time, you've already kind of included all the icons, screenshots, and description information, so you don't have to worry about that on your side. And then down below here, you can see the 2 new policy options. Again, remove the application on the MDM profile removal, as well as, of course, restricting the backup to iTunes for app data. And again, controlling these is as simple as checking these boxes. It's really simple, couldn't be any easier, and you're done. For international folks, we do have support for, of course, the international markets, as they are different. Some applications won't be in some markets, and some, of course, will be in others and not the United States. But we'll leave it here, for example, and just click Add to Mass 360. And then we're done. So we have our application now uploaded to our system here. Pushing it out is also quite easy. We'll go ahead and just push distribute application here. Down below you can see where you'd upload VPP codes if you had them. But we'll go ahead and click this button here. Now you can see this is actually grayed out. That's because Keynote is a paid application and we haven't uploaded VPP codes just yet. Once we do, you'll then see this option available to be checked and you can go forward. As far as distribution, you can pick whether you want to go to all iOS devices, a particular device group, and again you can kind of create your own groups, whether you want it to be a user-based attribute like AD, or potentially a hardware information like only iPads, for example, or iPhones, or a particular device as well. For the sake of demo here, we'll go ahead and choose all iOS devices and pick distribute here. And at this point in time, I would now see in my device a listing for the Keynote application in my application catalog. So it's really that easy to add a new iTunes applications. As far as the VPP program goes, again, it's also quite easy. You would log into your VPP account on iTunes, select the Keynote application, buy X copies of Keynote, and then once you're done, Apple will give you a CSV file of the license redemption codes. You then take that CSV file here, click Upload File, pick the CSV file, and then click Add to Mass 360. And then that is now a VPP application, and your user can now buy it without worrying about having to pay for or expense Keynote. So it's, again, really, really easy. Next, we'll hop through our enterprise application here. And this is one that you develop internally. We have two options. You can upload the application to our own content distribution network that we have here in the cloud. So there's no worries about if you're pushing a 500 meg application out, will it crash your internet link? We'll take care of that all for you. Or if your users in, say, Western Europe will have a slow response time from your US-based server here, again, not a problem. Or, of course, you can also host it yourself as well. You can enter a simple category, let's say business. Great, or you can make your own. Enter description, and then upload some screenshots here. I'll go ahead and pick my application here. You can see kind of our Acme ERP app here. Great. And then you also have the same options you did before around, again, controlling the profile removal as well as the app data. We'll go ahead and click these just to take advantage of this new functionality. Hit upload. And we're actually uploading the application right now to, our CDN here to make it available for download. Just take another couple seconds here. And we're done. Great. And you can see here that we've automatically also picked out the version number as well as, again, the icon information as well. We'll go ahead and hit distribute here. And now, since this is actually an enterprise application, the instant install is now available. So we'll go ahead and click on that button. And now, on my device here, I'll get a quick alert on my device to install the application, whether I'm in email, checking in my applications, or perhaps playing Angry Birds. And it's really quite that easy to push out both public applications, upload VPP codes, and also push out enterprise applications. For the enterprise apps, you also have a couple more options here. Of course, you can push out a new version of the application, and they'll be notified to download the new version, as well as also update the provisioning profile here. You can see, for example, my provisioning profile will expire in February 2nd, and if I wanted to, I could just go up to Apple's site, download a new provisioning profile, and then use that workflow to push out to my new users, and so they can actually go ahead and keep using that past that February 2nd date. All right, last here, we can see that the reporting here is quite simple and basic here. I've got a listing of active distributions. Those are all ones, as I have one distribution per application, as well as some of the installs here. So I have Keynote installed on my device, I have Angry Birds installed, and I have WebEx. And so again, it's really easy to try and track how many of your devices have actually installed these applications. So in this case, you can see it's my iPhone, my username, and a last reported it there is installed with Keynote today. I think we have one quick question of what end user will see when they push Keynote there. So what they will see is, if you remember back to that PowerPoint slide with the end user experience screenshots, they would see the Keynote option appear in that list of other applications. When they wouldn't hit install, if they didn't do VPP, we would push them off to the iTunes store, where they can then install it and pay for it that way. If you did do VPP, they'll get a simple blue box popping up saying the company essentially push your application, and it will not charge you any money to download it. You hit OK, and you enter in your iTunes credentials, and you're done. So it would all be within that iTunes, that app catalog from ads. So a nice, convenient and simple workflow there. I think that a little clarification there of a confirmation to install or a prompt to confirm if it has been paid by VPP. It's actually one and the same. If you look at that screenshot of that text, it actually says that your company wants to make an app available to you, and it won't cost you any money. So if you think back to kind of what that instant install is there for that blue box, it only applies for applications that are either free, paid by VPP, or enterprise, and so there's no money changing hands there. Again, the one left out there is the paid apps that aren't by VPP, and that still has to go through the iTunes store. All right, great. Okay, well that was a really quick, simple walkthrough of the app management, and I'll log out here and turn back to the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And for everyone who is asking questions, we've certainly been logging them, and we'll take some time to do Q&A after we wrap up the remaining slides here.
Okay, so real quickly here, kind of the app management difference here for Master 60. We are a cloud service, so you have no hardware or infrastructure changes on your side. We do have that global secure content distribution network. Again, I kind of mentioned earlier where no matter where they are in the world, we have a close, nearby, fast download link, as well as, of course, no worries about your internet link for outbound users, because most of these devices are, again, mobile and on the internet, not necessarily on your corporate network. We do allow you to take control of the apps in the enterprise. We didn't show this today, but we had actually shown this in the past in one of our previous webinars about blacklisting, whitelisting, or requiring applications. And then finally, did show a brief demo there of the fine grid app control. And so you can actually pick what department, what AD user group, or what hover attributes you actually want these applications to go out to. So for example, if I'm in the marketing department and I leave and go to the engineering department, I could potentially lose applications that were only targeted at marketing. And finally, we do have an app SDK for rapid and secure app development. So for any of those who are kind of looking at potentially developing applications, we do have that available to try and make things a little faster and a little more secure for best practices there.
Thanks. Yeah, a lot of great information there. One thing I'm finding when I'm talking to customers right now is that the use of cloud to manage applications on these devices that live in the cloud is becoming very important. Particularly, you mentioned, Josh, our app cloud and distributing those large applications globally and not having to worry about bandwidth or servers and scale, and I think that's quite interesting. I think we did want to pause and ask a quick question and ask, how our audience today is managing mobile apps. Are you using an MDM service? Do you have a specific app management service maybe that you utilize? Is it all a manual process at the moment, or are you not managing apps at all? We'll take a couple moments and see what the audience thinks. All right. So yeah, it looks like the vast majority are either not managing apps yet, or maybe doing something manually, with a few folks using an MDM service today. So quite interesting. I think it actually resonates in line with what we're hearing from the folks we're talking to in the market today, and it seems like this year folks have really been working to get their hands wrapped around the devices that are under management, and they're starting to think strategically about the role of applications as a business productivity tool in 2012 and beyond. So quite interesting. Thanks for the responses.
All right, so real quick, this is the final session of our three-part iOS 5 webinar. And so some kind of closing comments here about potentially some trends with where things are going, and what the new iOS 5 management and new policy controls mean. So I think you can kind of take a quick look here and see that Apple remains committed to supporting the enterprise. And so that's pretty important for all of us who are looking to use these devices, of course, in our companies, and kind of be able to take advantage of all the productivity benefits that all these applications and smartphones really offer. And so some good examples here is that Siri and iCloud are two of probably the most showcase or prominent features of iOS 5. And Apple has actually allowed enterprises to take control of them and potentially even disable them if you want to. And so again, they're allowing you folks to actually take control of these features that they put essentially a good chunk of effort into, and some of the most important features of iOS 5. Again, they also went through the app management workflows and improved those even further, and did some further things to help improve the enterprise app workflow, especially around retaining control of the applications that you actually pushed, as well as making the VPP program a little more streamlined and a little more reliable there from a workflow use case. So again, definitely committed to supporting enterprise. I think that's pretty clear. Last, they also are pretty committed to a world-class user experience and personal freedom. So you can kind of think about the opt-out and opt-in model there. So for example, for installing apps, the user does have to click through and agree to them to be installed. So there is no real silent app install, for example. The same goes for location. If the user wants to report location to the MDM service, they do have to opt in there, as well as messaging and, of course, MDM itself. So they'll enroll, and they can then, of course, unenroll themselves as well there. So it's a very much kind of opt-in and opt-out model. And that really kind of drives a living relationship between the user and the enterprise. And a lot of it kind of falls into a sort of a carrot and stick approach. So, for example, if you require users to have location services enabled, and they can kind of go in and, on demand remove that location service, the option there isn't really to kind of require it to be on, but the option there in kind of the iOS world is to then take a reactionary approach once that user has, of course, turned that feature off. So, for example, potentially you actually remove access to email or remove the access to certain applications if they turn off that location support there. And so it's a very much sort of a carrot and stick approach. If you want to be able to use your device in the enterprise, you will have to kind of play by some rules there. And if I don't, then you can kind of take action there and make sure that that device, which potentially no longer meets your compliance or company policies, no longer has any access. And so it's very much, that seems to be the model that Apple is going towards, and they're working to kind of make that smoother, roll out some more features like apps in this case for iOS 5, and really kind of building that out, versus a more locked down traditional enterprise model where the user really has no control of their device. Last, as far as iOS 5, definitely with the new over-the-air wireless control, activation, backup, and syncing, these devices can definitely solve more use cases than before. So previously, they really needed a laptop sort of close by, and these days, with iOS 5, definitely not the case, and the iPads and iPhones can kind of go out in the wild on their own and really live off that for years without having to touch an iTunes or a laptop. So again, definitely a pretty expansive use case there for them with these changes. Okay, wrapping up here. We kind of mentioned early on here with iOS 5, seeing about anywhere from 30 to 40% of users have already upgraded in just a month. So certainly, if you have these devices in the enterprise, which you probably do if you're supporting any kind of iOS device, take advantage of the new iOS 5 control features today. The webinar is available. They're all recorded on our Master Center there. That's the link. And then finally, we are from Master 60. We do have instant MDM. So we're a cloud-based SaaS service, nothing to install. A free trial is available online today. You can go ahead and get started. So feel free to go do that at the end of the webinar today. And again, we do have all the iOS 5 features supported today. And we have these essentially from launch of iOS 5. So it's pretty exciting. And also, since we're a cloud-based service, you actually get these without any kind of action on your own part. It's kind of day one there of iOS 5. You had the new policy controls, you had the new management controls, without kind of taking any kind of downtime or change control or kind of upgrading any boxes. So we think that's pretty handy and helpful there. And we'll kind of move on to our last slide of thanks. And Chris, if you can.
Sure. So thank you, Josh, from all of us who've got to listen to the three-part series. I think it was quite informative. We've gotten some very positive comments, and we really appreciate the audience chiming in and letting us know that. Obviously, you can view all of the previous webinars on the Master Center as always, and we certainly hope that you do that. Obviously, if you did attend all three parts of this session, be checking your email. Make sure you're not blocking mail from fiberlink.com. We will be giving away an iPhone 4S, and we will be contacting you here in the near future. Some really exciting stuff coming up on the More series, actually. The next webinar is November 17th, and one of our most successful and well-attended webinars to date was when we pitted the iPad versus the Zoom tablet. This time we're going to take a different spin on that and kind of talk Kindle Fire versus iPad 2 and their enterprise relevance. So really should be a really interesting webinar. Please sign up for that because we actually will be giving away both a Kindle Fire and an iPad 2 during that webinar. So it's going to be quite great. On December 1st, we're going to be talking about a new function of MAS 360 that we talk about expense management and really controlling some of the mobile data expenses that these mobile devices constantly will be bringing into the organization. You saw the past webinars. Please make sure that you're on top and viewing those, and you know that you can access them directly on mas360.com/webinars. There's a lot of content on the Master Center. So I saw a couple questions come in asking about, how do I do certain things in MAS 360? Obviously, Josh showed you some of those functions, but we do have a forum on the Master Center with tips and tricks and how-tos, which go through a lot of different functions and policy settings and how to manage certain things. So please, if you are a current customer, please take advantage of that. And then obviously, if you're not a current customer and it's something you want to try out, after we go through the Q&A here, you'll be redirected to an evaluation screen where you can actually sign up and try this thing instantly for yourself. And we'll contact you and go through that process with you. You'll also get a follow-up email from us with instructions as well. So what I was thinking we'd do right now is, Josh, if it's okay with you, I've been taking notes in terms of questions that that some of the audience has been asking. So I think I'll go through a few of them and you can respond, okay?
Absolutely, great.
So the first one, this one's actually come up a couple times, so I did want to make sure we touched on it. And it has to do with the volume purchase program and the company making this purchase of the app, deploying it to a device, and then, say that user leaves the organization, right? Is that volume purchase program code still available for the company to use on another device, or will they have to go out and add more licenses to their volume purchase program?
Yeah, so that's a great question, one that we got a lot in talking with prospects and customers and other people. Essentially what happens is that volume purchase program, that license code, you can kind of think of it as a gift or redemption code, which is good for one redemption. And so essentially what will happen is that user will get that a single redemption code out of the X that you bought and will redeem it against their iTunes account. So that could potentially be a corporate account or it could be a personal account. Potentially, and that code is not otherwise transferable. So once it is used, that application will forever be allowed to be run on that iTunes account. So kind of depending on how you control or use iTunes accounts in your organization, will sort of control whether or not that code could potentially be reused. But in general, it's a one-time only redemption for a single iTunes account.
Thank you. And luckily, it's not like the costs of these iTunes apps or anything like what we pay in enterprise software licensing for our PCs on a regular basis.
Certainly true. They tend to be significantly cheaper.
Another question came in and asked, if I remove an app, a managed app, from the end user's device, could that end user just restore that app from an iTunes backup?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In general, the answer would be yes. They could potentially go and download it again from the iTunes market, or they could go ahead and download it from the potentially or restore it from iTunes or iCloud. But the real key there is if you actually block that app data from being backed up and synced. So if you kind of check that box there to prevent the app data from being synced to iTunes, that app data will not go back. And so if you're worried about that data going anywhere, once the box is checked, it won't, and you can feel pretty comfortable in that.
Yeah, so that's an important setting you showed everyone in the policy screen then in terms of managed apps that we want to be careful about apps, and more importantly, it's the app data, I think, getting backed up to an end user's screen. So
yeah, and just to follow on there, if they do reinstall it, just to clarify, that app will still remain as managed. So if you delete it, they manually reinstall it. You can, of course, just go ahead and just delete it again if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you. So I had one come in about app updates. So the question was asked when you were talking about enterprise apps, Josh, so I think it had something to do with that realm. But So if I'm pushing enterprise apps, I developed it myself. Maybe I used the really slick Maz 360 app SDK, and I pushed this app out to a device, and now I have an update I want to make to the app. How's that process work? Is it simple, or is it a whole new reinstall, or?
Yeah, so it's really simple. All you'd have to do is go into the app management workflows, which we were in earlier, and there's a drop-down in that actions box for upgrade application. You would then pick that option there. You have the option to refresh any of your quote-unquote marketing content. So screenshots and descriptions can be edited and changed, and so you can kind of tout your new features to your users, and then you can upload the new IPA file or the new URL, for example. And then what users will see is all new users will, of course, download the new version of the application, not the old version, and the old users will then be prompted to go ahead and update it. So they'll get a little note on their device saying, a new version has been made available to you of your application, and go ahead and update it.
Thanks. So this was a good question. I like this one because it referenced the Maz app in it, so I made sure we'll respond to this one. But they asked if they would be able to auto-push an app, like Maz 360 app in this scenario, instead of manually pushing it. So, obviously maybe creating just a global repeating push for any new device that becomes under management to ensure that a certain app exists.
Yeah, so certainly. So I think that kind of goes probably towards our required app workflows that we have. So these applications are ones that you really want users to have, whether they're VPN applications or they're some kind of other application which you want essentially all users to have. And so I think leveraging our required app workflows would be a good option there to try and make sure that users have them and install them and don't go too long to be without them. Yeah,
it's really a combination, I think, of creating that global distribution to all devices for a particular app. Could be Maz 360, could be a VPN app, and ensuring that any new device that becomes under enrollment would then be applicable for that app, and then obviously leveraging the required app workflow. Speaking of kind of understanding what apps are present and not, admin notifications in terms of application installs. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe that required app workflow, and if I put an app, in that required app list and the user just doesn't install it, will I be notified as an admin, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do list an application in that workflow, users who don't have them who install can have a configurable grace period to install it, and if they don't install it in that time period, you can have automated actions kind of kick in to sort of take that carrot and stick approach we mentioned earlier to kind of encourage them to install it. And so these could be things like alerts to the user, alerts to the admin, or potentially things like selective wipe if it's a really critical application which they're missing.
Thank you. We had a slightly off-topic question come in, but it was in regards to Maz 360 controlling access to devices over ActiveSync versus the company having to go in and manually approve every device in Exchange, which can be a burdensome process. So somebody asked if we would be able to integrate with their ActiveSync environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our Exchange integration, which works for a number of different Exchange versions, as well as we also have support for a few different mail providers as well. And so these are things like Office 365 or things like Windows Host Traveler, kind of the pretty common ways people get mail to these devices. And so we do have integration with those, and we actually can kind of close the loop, so to speak, as far as the management is concerned and the email access. And so if they don't obey certain core policies, we can then kind of, course, take actions like blocking them or even kind of having a sort of a quarantine approach to new devices that come in and actually ensure they're under management before they get access to email.
And to clarify a question previously about restricting an application backing up to iTunes, that would mean that nothing in regards to that app or that app data would actually ever be backed up to iTunes should the user plug their device into their home computer, right? So thus, nothing could be restored from iTunes.
Yeah, exactly. So the key thing there is the app data is not going to get backed up to iTunes, and so if they did, delete it and then reinstall it, or if you deleted and reinstalled it, that app data would then not be available to be, anywhere essentially. So to that sense, it's something that is they restrict back up to and not from.
And we did have a question come in, and I'd like to reference a previous webinar, so certainly go back and view part 2, but we'll address it now as well, asking about would we be able to prevent backing up of applications and their data to, say, iCloud?
Yeah, I believe the same controls there were for iPhone as well.
All right, thanks. And then we did have a question come in just in terms of documentation, right? So I wanted to make sure I did make a global note here that on the Mass 360 website there is some new information on iOS 5, including a new iOS 5 specific data sheet that outlines a lot of the new functionality that we have available. So I certainly recommend you familiarize yourself with that document. I'd also like to make sure I point out the fact that we do have the Master Center forums where we've been trying to constantly update information in terms of the new iOS 5 policy workflows as well as app management workflows. And certainly we welcome our customers and users of the portal to chime in there with questions they have or maybe tips or tricks that they've used in their environment for utilizing these this functionality. Now, Josh, just to clarify something, because this was a question, iOS 5 is required on the devices to take advantage of all of this new functionality, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that does mean it is quite important to make sure your users do upgrade to iOS 5. Is there any way to kind of alert users that they're not at the latest version of an operating system using a Mass 360?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple of different ways to do that. Number one is we have a minimum OS version, and so if you wanted to try and prompt your users to upgrade to iOS 5, you certainly can, and you can kind of set configurable intervals there as well, much like you could with the required app workflows. So you could give them, 2-3 weeks to upgrade to iOS 5, and if they don't, you can then, of course, take some automated action or just have a simple alert go out to admins to kind of chase them down manually there if you want to as well. I think one other question here coming is around the encrypted backups. We actually can absolutely require encrypted backups. Actually, if you enroll with our MDM service, those will actually be required from the start there, just because of some of the data that gets backed up to the system around the kind of the APNS messaging does require that to be enabled. So certainly, once you enroll in our device management solution, those backups will require to be encrypted.
Very nice. Thank you, Josh. And just to clarify, certainly the device does need to be enrolled in mobile device management to take advantage of this functionality. We did see that question come in, so I wanted to make sure that we did address that. The MDM initial enrollment is required, but from that point on, you'll have all of the over-the-air ability to configure, secure, and manage these devices in an ongoing fashion, all from the cloud, obviously. So I think that might have been all the questions I saw, Josh. So with that, I think we'll close out, and we're getting close to the hour anyway. And I'd like to just say thank you to everyone, obviously, who attended this webinar, but more importantly, to everyone who attended all three. We really appreciate it. We hope that we continue to be a good resource for all things Apple, iOS, all things mobile device management and cloud. Please, don't be a stranger on the future webinars. We hope to see you on iPad 2 versus Kindle. And we'll be sending you an email with some follow-up and thank you as well. So from me, thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you all. Thanks for taking part in the three-part series here. Hopefully you find it helpful and valuable.